software package, NetSuite by Oracle. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you decide and how you vetted the vendors around and ultimately decided to go with that platform?
Yeah, this was probably back in 2016, I think. We really, as an organization, were going through a rapid growth spurt, and we're looking at two things. One, we had a lot of different data systems that we used for a lot of the different departments and business components of Together. And it made us really disjointed. It made it really difficult for us to get the information we were looking for. And so we started exploring different options for how we could get all of those systems really kind of condensed down to one, to make it more efficient on one side, but two, to really give us the opportunity to get the data customized in a way that we were looking for that was really usable and would help us make decisions. So we looked at several different products. A lot of people probably don't know this, but nonprofits sometimes have an opportunity to get software through a site called TechSoup. And so that was one of the places we looked where we could get certain software packages at a discount. NetSuite was one of those, but so we went through a due diligence process, sent out an RFP, which is a request for proposals. The COO and I reviewed those, and NetSuite was the one that we ended up choosing. And actually was not the most cost effective. We didn't make the choice based simply on price. It was the one that was the best fit for us.
As you went through the implementation process, what were the things you were looking for to make sure that it actually was meeting the expectations that you had set forth?
One of the first things that we did in evaluating was looking at performance indicators for moving data from the old system to the new system, because there was a lot of opportunities to lose data when you're moving from 6 or 7 systems to one new one. So one of the first things we had to do was make sure all the data got moved and it was moved correctly and accurately. And that went really well. The second piece that we had to look at was and measure and monitor. Once all the data was moved, then our forms of entering the data into the new system, did we have all of the online forms customized correctly to make sure that we could collect the data that we needed to? And so that could be data for donors, volunteers, vendors, program participants, really every part of our organization. And then really the next thing was, okay, we know all the data got moved. We know we have the ability to collect new data. We knew the data was getting into the system correctly. So now the third kind of point was, how do we get the data back out? And so we had help customizing reporting for all of those areas that I talked about: donors, volunteers, program participants. We had reporting mechanisms built and customized to make sure that we could get that data back out in a form that was usable for us.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You had help actually setting up the dashboard, and what were some of the things? I know you talked about the different groups, but was it the number of members? Was it types of actions? What were some of the vectors that you were looking at and wanted information displayed readily for you to be able to make decisions for your business?
Yeah, I'll share a couple examples. So on the financial side, for example, things that are really critical for us to be able to always have access to are your cash flow statement, your balance sheet, your profit and loss, and your budget versus actual. Those are 4 key things that we look at a lot. And so to have those set up, have those customizable reports built, and have the data to be live, so that way we have access to that at any time, and have it be accurate, whether I pull the report at 10:46 in the morning or 8:56 at night, to not have to go through a big process to be able to have that data at your fingertips. Because in a nonprofit, people may know we don't necessarily always have smooth cash flow like maybe a for-profit business does. Sometimes, at the beginning of the year after the holidays, for example, it looks like we're sitting on Fort Knox because you get all these donations at the end of the year. But then end of the first quarter arrives, and all of a sudden, people aren't donating through the first quarter, but the expenses continue like this. And so, having that cash flow statement available every day to help you monitor cash flow and are we going to be able to pay our bills is really critical information to have. Because also, if anybody's ever taken a accounting class and looked at nonprofit accounting and looked at accrual basis versus cash basis, most of our financial statements are accrual basis. And so, what your profit and loss statement look like is not really a reflection of what your cash basis is. And so it can be very deceiving. And then the other one I'll share an example on, because it's what we spend most of our time on, is participant data. So the people that receive our services and our supports. And I like to describe that in two buckets. We look at it from an output perspective, and we look at it from an outcome perspective. So the outputs are all the things that we do and all the services that we deliver, or the financial assistance that we provide to each individual or their household. And those lead to the outcomes that we're looking for. And so all of the reports that we had customized and all the what we call intake forms that we use to collect the data are all customized around those two lenses, if you will. So that way we're tracking the actions or the outputs that we do every day that lead to the longer term outcomes that we're looking for. So a very specific example would be somebody comes in, they're requesting help because they're facing an eviction. The short-term outputs would be, we met with them 3 or 4 times, so that's 3 or 4 case management services. We paid their back rent for $1,500. That's a service and a financial investment. Those are the actions, but the end result or the outcome that those things result in is this person retained their housing and they're stably housed. And so their health is better. They can stay employed. Those are things that become the outcome.
I think that's invaluable. So I do want to kind of step back a little bit from this and talk about the process to define those. Was that already standing? Right? Were those the goals that you were trying to do? And then we brought in a technology to make that process easier to collect, easier to monitor, or were those developed in the implementation process?
A little bit of both. It was hybrid. So there was a lot of things that were in place, but having the new system made it easier to get the data and more timely. But then also having this opportunity with a new platform that we were going to be implementing also gave us an opportunity to take a step back and review and evaluate and say, is the data we're currently collecting what we need to collect and what we want to collect? And are there gaps or data that we're not collecting that we should, because it helps us, number one, evaluate and reflect on the impact that we're having. Are we getting the results that we're looking for? But also, are there things that we're just missing? There's pieces of the story that we're not telling because we're not collecting the data.
Right. When you're looking at this, who are the stakeholders? I think it gets really on 2 points. The stakeholders that were involved in the beginning of the process that you got together, the we, who is the we? And then secondarily, who's helping you with the quality assurance, right? As you implemented it, who are the individuals that are giving that feedback that, yes, this is the data we want, it's being collected the way we want it?
Yeah, at the beginning, really the key stakeholders involved in helping us kind of map out what we wanted the overall system to look like and do were the leadership team for Together. So our development director, our COO, program director, chief development officer, kind of everybody that's responsible for all of the departments. A board member at the time who happens to be the chief information officer for Mutual of Omaha, which is a great resource. And then a couple of our key donor stakeholders that you're always providing information to. That was really the kind of advisory council, if you will, that kind of helped us look at what kind of system we were hoping to build. Once it was built, and we started to get the information that we were looking for, really the quality assurance, or the group that evaluates all the data, is the executive leadership team, the board of directors, and then a consumer advisory council. Those are 3 groups that review the information on a regular basis. Quarterly, and this is the data comes out of NetSuite. Quarterly, I produce a dashboard that goes to our top 200 stakeholders. We call it our performance and quality improvement dashboard. And that is the mechanism that we use for quality assurance. So quarterly, we review all that data and then make adjustments to programs, processes, policies based on that data to make sure that we're constantly improving.
That's very powerful. I appreciate that. Can you talk a little bit about where that data is being used, the kind of the projections of it? Are you doing predictive information at this point, like predictive analytics? Is it helping you kind of guide the ship, or is it more of the status of the of where you're at? I mean, I guess an easier way to explain this is it like a GPS, this is where you're at, or is it like a navigation system, like this is where you're going?
It's both. I think for one example, from a fundraising perspective, it really helps us have 2 conversations with a donor, an investor, a stakeholder. One, it really helps us reflect and share information with them about the impact of our programs and whether we've had significant growth, or in a good way, maybe services and client need has gone down, which is a good thing. That's what we're looking for, which has not happened in the last 24 months, but under normal circumstances, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to shorten the line. But it also is our compass looking to the future. You can look back 3 to 4 years, and sometimes there's certain trend lines that are very hard to argue against. You can look at it and go, well, that's not really the trend line that I like to see, but the trend line is telling me that we're going to really need to build more infrastructure around this program, because the need is accelerating greatly, and if we're going to continue to meet that need, we need more resources, because we're going to need to hire more people, and we're going to need to provide more food, or back rent, whatever the situation is. It really does both for us.
That's incredibly empowering. I think the ability to be able to see the trend lines, to see where they're headed, really make it a lot simpler to make decisions, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about your methodology that you had to go through or the process you had to employ to be able to do that before the implementation? What did it look like trying to figure out which way the direction the ship was going?
Yeah, so on the housing and homeless services side, it was somewhat easier because you have a lot of best practices out there that you can research and find the information pretty easily, because HUD has a lot of best practices as far as performance indicators you should be using. Are they short-term, medium-term, long-term? And so we had a lot of resources available to us to research and then decide which one of those do we want to use, or what set of those do we want to use to build out the reporting mechanisms for any of our programs related to housing or homelessness. An area that is still a battle today is food insecurity. It is very difficult to measure anything with a level of certainty around food insecurity. And what I mean by that is it is very difficult to prove with any level of certainty that any one intervention that we provide as an organization has a quantifiable impact on a household or individual with 100% certainty. Meaning, for example, does this one box of food that I give you mean you are now food insecure versus yesterday you were food insecure? It is virtually impossible to make that connection, even though it would be easy for us. It would be much easier for us as an organization, or organizations like Together, to be able to say, yep, this box of food that I gave you now makes you food insecure. It doesn't work that way. So, really, higher wages, more stable housing, healthier community, better education, all of those things go into really somebody being food secure versus food insecure. And so it's really hard to quantify those things. So that's something that our sector on the food insecurity and hunger side continues to struggle with and battle with, is how do you really show return on investment, if you will, where on the housing and homeless services side, it is much easier for us to do that because of the metrics that are available and have been proven over years.
Can you talk a little bit about the data sets? I know you mentioned HUD and being able to bring that data into what you're doing. Is that something that you're bringing alongside, or have you integrated it with your solution that you implemented?
We've integrated it. So it's still not as integrated as I would like it to be. Sometimes we have to do some duplicate data entry, but it does all end up in NetSuite. But for example, some things you might see from a specific data set would be, did we provide a rent payment, a utility payment? Did we provide a box of food? How much was that rent payment? How much was that utility payment? Did we provide furniture? Did we provide a move-in kit when we move somebody into a new apartment? All of those lists of services are parts of the data set. And then on the outcome side, you might have something like somebody comes to us, they're currently experiencing homelessness. We're providing a lot of services, but one outcome measure might be from the point we come in contact, how many days till we actually move them into their permanent housing. Because we always want that to be 30 days or less. That's a critical performance measure for us. Unfortunately, in the current housing market, it's probably closer to 45 to 50 days on average, because there's not anywhere near enough affordable or low income housing available. Another measure might be, okay, the goal of this housing program is to take people that were experiencing homelessness, and when they exit the program, they've exited to permanent housing and they sustain that. So one of our highest level or probably most important measures is what's called a recidivism rate. And so that measures the success of somebody once they've actually exited the program. How long do they stay stably housed? So those are some examples of data sets on both sides, the outcomes versus the outputs.
You mentioned that you have specific targets that you've designed and implemented. Can you talk a little bit about, I think ultimately what I'm looking for here is how do you decide that metric? I mean, did you look at the information? Is it kind of something based on your observations? How much is the data that you've created, the visualizations of that data impacting those kind of hard KPIs, key performance indicators, and so that you're tracking along those lines?
Yeah, I think when we developed the system, half of the data, let's say, in those KPIs were historic. And so we carried that information with us. And so the historical data drives the current KPIs. So, if we were at XYZ point last year, we want to be at XYZ point this year. The areas that were new KPIs, most of the targets or benchmarks that we set were based on national data. So we went and researched and looked at national best practices. So for this program and this specific KPI, what's the national kind of best practice say? And that's where we started. And then based on historical data, as we collected that data over the years, now we adjust every year based on the historical data we see. And that could be, if we see positive trends, meaning the lines are shortening, then we adjust that way. If we see what we've seen in the last 2 years, which is the trend line is like an upward incline really fast, then you adjust accordingly as well. And just as I alluded to earlier, the information for those things is much easier to find on the housing and homeless services side. It's much more difficult to find on the food insecurity side. You really have to, the more historical data you have, the better, because there's not a lot out there from a best practice, heavily researched, from an outcome perspective.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share those insights. Are there any last thoughts or comments you want to share with the students, as well as how can they contact you?
Yeah, the biggest piece that I would share is, and it probably sounds redundant, data is critical. There is not a point of my day that isn't involving some type of data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative data. You have to make informed decisions, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a manager, whether you're a director, no matter what role you're playing in an organization, nonprofit, government entity every day. You need information to make decisions. And data is where that information comes from. And so if you have mechanisms or resources available to collect that data or retain that data, even if it's, looking at periodicals, reading newspapers, whatever it is, the more access you have to data and information, the better off you are to make sound decisions. And then I would, I'm here and available if people have questions, they want to know more. My email is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, and that's mhornacek@Together Omaha. And happy to be a resource and answer anybody's questions.